Those who went to a private school, what was the best rich kid meltdown you witnessed? I know a guy who didn't get into a college he really wanted to go to. Instead of accepting it, his parents spent millions to pay for a wing of a new building to be built. And after that, the college accepted him. He still had to pay full tuition after that too, $60K per year. My mom works at a prep school that I went to. Important to this story is the snowstorm that had been forecasted all week. As I'm putting together my bag of ski stuff in her office, her richest student showed up at the door. This kid is a billionaire, with a B, also sobbing his eyes out, like my leg is broken or my dog had just died crying. The problem was his dad's helicopter was grounded in New York City and not allowed to make the flight to their private jet in Teterboro, New Jersey. Instead, his dad would have to rent a limo to take him to a hotel in the area. This was delaying his trip to Belize or Cancun and meant that he wouldn't get to start getting wasted for another 3 hours or so. And he was just so stressed. I was going to a normal public high school at the time. There was this girl in a youth group I was in who put everyone else down. She would go on and on about how much her parents loved her and how they loved her so much that she got to go to a fancy private school. She would really rub it in too. Not having a good day, grades not so good, sick day. Well, if only your parents loved you enough to send you to a private school like mine do. It was annoying and hurtful to everyone. Well, one day I'm walking down the hall to my next class and I see the principal introducing a new student to the teacher. It was none other than this girl. Her folks must have gotten sick of her attitude and decided they needed to put her back into public school for an attitude adjustment. It sounds like this girl needed to be humbled a little. This was probably the right decision parentally. A bit of backstory, Sao Paulo has really crappy traffic, and rush hour is just miserable. Hours to go a few miles. So this girl who used to be nicer when she was younger became a total witch in high school. One day, her driver picked her up in the wrong car. It wasn't the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, but a mere normal car. She completely ignored him, refused to acknowledge he was there or waiting for her to get in the car. So that poor guy had to drive back to her house without her in the crappiest traffic imaginable to get the Benz. Drive back in the crappiest traffic imaginable to pick up a spoiled brat who started yelling at him for being incredibly late. I'm 100% sure he didn't drive the Benz in the first place because her dad forbade the driver from taking it. Ugh, God, I really do feel bad for that guy. I can't imagine having to put up with a child like that. I went to a boarding school in the late 90s, and I remember a girl in my Spanish class trying, unsuccessfully but at great length, to argue her way out of a tardy because Daddy's secretary forgot to call and wake me up this morning. Do private colleges count? If so, there was a rich girl from LA who went to my college and demanded a private apartment in one of the dorm buildings because she didn't want roommates. Shortly after, she decided she didn't want to stay in the dorms at all and had her parents rent her a house that was $7,500 a month. This was in San Francisco, so I'm pretty sure most of you can imagine how expensive things can be. I went to an expensive private school on a scholarship and was friends with this girl Samantha, whose mom had security cameras in every room of the house and would constantly spy on her. Also had monitoring programs on the computer, the whole 9 yards. My parents mentioned this to me once, and being a stupid kid, I told Samantha. The mom flipped her lid. I'm talking calling my parents several times a day to berate them, to the point where they had to block her number. I was never allowed over to her house again. Samantha and her friends bullied me relentlessly for the rest of the year. It was pretty traumatic, honestly. I didn't understand what was going on because I thought I was doing the right thing by telling her. This one doesn't feel fair to our original poster. They were just trying to give you a heads up that you're being spied on. For all of that to blow back in your face like that kind of leaves you not wanting to help people again in the future. I went to boarding school for 2 years. I was on a scholarship and most of the other girls were trust fund babies. They'd go skiing in Europe. Every week, they'd go on shopping sprees at the mall and make room in their closets by throwing out brand new, still with tags outfits. I didn't have money to go shopping, but I loved those days because I could pick through the new clothes in the trash cans and find beautiful things for me and my sister. One day, one of the snottier rich girls found me looking through the garbage and said some horrible things about how I was a trash picker, poor, and other stuff I've blocked out. I hid from class for 2 days because I was so embarrassed. A few months later, I was in the study hall late at night. Going back through the hallways to my room, I heard her sobbing in the hall. I almost walked right by, but I felt really bad for her. I stopped to ask her what was wrong, and she blurted out that her parents were divorcing. Then she realized who I was and started getting all rude. I gave her some Kleenex from my bag and told her I was sorry that was happening to her. Then I walked away. She wasn't super nice to me ever, but I think she got a little bit nicer after that, especially when her buddies weren't around. Honestly, it sounds like they're the stupid ones. You were getting brand new clothes for free. Let them call you all the names you want. You're getting high-end stuff for free? I'm not gonna complain. I went to an all-women's private college. My second-year roommate was a disaster. Screamed on the phone as loud as possible with her parents if they didn't send her $5,000 a week. She wanted a new snowboard and had spent her $5,000 on going out and God knows what. She had a total meltdown in the hallway of the dorm, screaming that her parents didn't really care about her. I can't impress upon you how loud she was screaming. I was like, if I could get $50 a month, I was thrilled. But my parents never sent me money ever. How are you blowing through $5,000 a week? And even with that incredibly generous allowance, you still call and ask for more money instead of waiting until next week? Not exactly a meltdown, but a behavior issue. This kid was the senator's son, and in my history class behind me, he always acted entitled, and the teacher even praised his father like he was God. We get our test grades back, and he happens to see that I got a really good grade. For some reason, as we were passing our tests up the row for the teacher to recollect, he says, "Pick these up by yourself, nerd," and throws them all across the floor in front of me. This was in high school. I hadn't witnessed such a cheap way of bullying since elementary school. Ugh, this kid really just sounds like he plays up to all the stereotypes. My mom was an English teacher at a private school that I also went to, but her stories always seemed to be more intense than mine. Once, she was teaching a particularly badly behaved class, trying to get them to keep quiet and do the assigned work. This one stubborn kid decided that the best response was to say, "Why should I have to listen to you? My parents pay your salary." She flipped her lid, and that kid barely spoke for the rest of the year. This isn't from me, but my mom, who was a teacher at a private school. Just prepare yourself. So for this kid's 18th birthday, he gets this sweet red Porsche, which he drives to school. He doesn't need it to drive to school because he lives literally a 30-second walk away on the estate where the houses start at about £3 million each. But he does it anyway because he's a tool. Because this beautiful car must not be forced to mingle with the commoner cars of the other 6th form students, he's given permission to park it in the staff car park, which is still commoner cars but on a secured lot. Around a week later, he's showing off to his friends by fooling around in his car in the staff car park, and slams the passenger side of his car into the back of a staff car. The staff car is an old Jeep from the 90s, so it's not the least bit disturbed or dented from having a sports car wrapped around it. No one was in the passenger side, and the driver was fine, but the car itself looked like a really expensive boomerang. Of course, the kid starts screaming and crying and complaining, threatening all sorts of legal action. My mom was his head of year at the time, so he comes running to her demanding something be done. But she does everything but outright laugh in his face and tells him he's on his own. The next day, my mom comes into work and some very irate and powerful parents are waiting in her office, demanding to know why the school wasn't doing anything about the fact a staff member had crashed into their son's car, and threatening to press criminal charges if the school didn't pay up. The kid's there with a massive grin on his face. But this isn't my mother's first rodeo. Oh no, she's prepared. Oh? Well, that's not what the staff member said happened. Let's review the CCTV, shall we? Obviously, the kid is now bricking it, and the parents agree to watch, knowing they'll be vindicated. Of course, it shows the kid donutting around in his car before smashing into the Jeep. The parents slowly turn to the kid. The kid starts ranting and raving. Honest to God, full breakdown. My mom was worried an ambulance would have to be called to commit this child. Eventually, the parents agreed to pay for any damages to the staff's car. The kid got a new car, but it was something like a third-hand Ford Ka. and he wasn't allowed to drive it to school anymore. It got even better when the next year, his brother came into the 6th form and got a sweet ride, and told my mom that that original jerk had been banned from driving it, as well as the parents' new cars, after he also crashed his car. This is a perfect example of why you don't get your kids this age stuff that's very expensive. At the end of the day, they just end up ruining it. I'm sorry, you can't be trusted. We know you want to show off to your friends, but you can do that in a Ford. You don't need to do it in an expensive Porsche. I briefly attended a private school for about 3 years. A girl that had been going there since kindergarten received a low grade on a Spanish test and went off on the teacher about it. She got her parents involved in everything and ended up transferring schools because the teacher wouldn't adjust her grade. Is that really worth all the trouble involved? Like, spend an extra night studying Spanish. You'll be fine. I went to a normal high school, but I remember there was a rich girl that lost it one day because one of her nails broke on her manicured hand, and she called her mom to come get her so she could get it fixed immediately. The school was okay with it because they didn't want to hear her whining about it anymore. It wasn't a private school, rather a public school in a very wealthy town. We really did have the best of everything at my school. My family's fairly wealthy. Some of the kids I grew up with, though, were heirs to vast fortunes. Insurance, DuPont, sports empires, etc. I was sitting in the lobby at my high school. This girl had just gotten the ultra-exclusive Dolce & Gabbana Motorola Razr. She was going on and on about how exclusive it was. This other girl rounds the corner and was like, "Oh my god, I just got the same phone." The first girl looked like she was gonna choke her out. She got the girl to hand her her phone and said, "Poor girls like you don't deserve fashion accessories like this," and snapped her phone in half. The other girl took it unbelievably well. I actually became friends with her after that. Turns out that she was not poor at all. Her mother was one of the heirs to the Sears fortune, and her father was a bigwig at Motorola. The best part is that she got her father to give her 50 of these stupid gold Dolce & Gabbana phones, and handed them out a few days later to a bunch of kids at school. I still have mine somewhere in the box. I appreciated the gift, but never used it. Shout out to the girl who single-handedly ripped the exclusivity of this phone out of this school. My sister cried as she got a laptop for Christmas. For the previous year, she wanted a laptop, but for this, she only wanted clothes. It was made better when my mom opened a "I love my rotten, ungrateful children" fridge magnet after my sister went upstairs. Currently in a very wealthy private school in Manhattan. Many are wealthy, and many aren't who are on financial aid, but culture in the school is to be pretty humble about wealth. A girl that actually just moved here was telling me about her $50 million trust fund and her daddy's private plane. She picks up her phone and I see a text from her mom. I look over and see what appears to be a long apology from her mom about something. I ask her what she's apologizing for. The girl explains that she went ape on her parents the night earlier for making her fly first-class commercial, but she was the one receiving the apology. I don't think I managed to stifle my laughing. Honestly, this is not funny. This girl's gonna grow up to be a horrible person. I used to work at a private alternative school for at-risk youth in the Northeast. Parents sent their kids there from all over the world and paid about $80K a year for their entitled kids to go there. Biggest meltdown I ever saw was from a kid who lived in my dorm. We had a status system so those on the lowest status couldn't have their personal electronics from the time they turned them in the previous night until about 6 p.m. the next day. This kid notoriously skipped class to play WoW all day long and simply refused to turn his electronics into me. His advisor finally convinced him that turning in his electronics was a better idea than not doing it, so he turned them into me. The kid came to me asking for his electronics a few hours too early, and I said no. Since this kid was 18, he threatened to drop out and literally walk home. This was in the middle of nowhere, and this kid lived about an hour or two away. I stood my ground and still said no, so he ran downstairs to his room to pack his things. I called the admin on duty and he came and determined it was a situation for the headmaster to get involved. He also came and the kid threw enough of a hissy fit that they both came to me asking for the electronics. I handed them over and the kid calmed down, but it didn't end there. He decided he needed revenge. So one night, he and another student decided that they would spray my car with a fire extinguisher. The only reason I know it was him was because my advisee managed to get a video of it. The guy who was the head of the dorm next to mine was a volunteer firefighter. So he said to me the next morning, "Hey man, looks like your car got sprayed with a fire extinguisher." I didn't think anything of it, but he continued with, "That stuff will melt the paint off your car and etch your windows. You need to go wash it now." So I booked it to the nearest car wash and spent about $100 to save my paint. Luckily, the school reimbursed me and charged the family of the 2 kids for the cost of the wash. We're in a small town with one major manufacturing chain which pretty much owned everything in town. It recently moved its headquarters out of state and had an IPO. Anyway, the owning family, we'll call them Schmidt, had a Stanford-bound son who was attending the same driver's ed class as my sister, who had no idea who he was. Anyway, my sister, who entertains herself by persistently slightly annoying or flirting with random people, happened to make super rich Stanford-bound teen the object of her flirting. She flicked a tiny piece of paper at him, played with his hair a bit, and he says, "I'm Adam Schmidt," as if to say, "How dare you?" My sister had no idea that was supposed to mean something and just smilingly said, "Hi," then went back to flicking tiny paper balls at him. "I'm Adam Schmidt," he repeated. My sister was still undeterred. This went on for a while when he finally shouted in class, "I'm Adam Schmidt. Don't you know who my father is?" We looked him up after. Turns out he was a pretty big deal, and that phrase probably would have played really well with lots of people in our town. But to us? I had a rough time in public elementary school, so I went to a private Catholic school for middle school. I'm Jewish, but they let me attend, no doubt for the tuition, and just had me go to the computer lab when we did religion class or went to mass. One girl there hated me, just straight up would make fun of me because I was poor. My family was solidly middle class, so no. Or because my mom was an Eastern European immigrant and speaks with a thick accent. Or because I was a Jew. First time I had anti-Semitic crap hurled at me was from this little witch. Because I didn't have to sit through mass and got to play Oregon Trail instead. So my bat mitzvah comes around and my teacher decided to use it as a learning moment for the class. I explained what it was, that I get to have a big party and the whole thing. Of course, a bunch of 12 and 13-year-olds are going to be into it. Especially since I was the only Jew any of them were actually close with. The attention was off her, and she was getting more and more annoyed with it all. The Monday after my party, when everyone was talking about it, she threw a huge fit in the parking lot after school when her mom picked her up, because she wouldn't let her have a bat mitzvah. Apparently she had asked, and her mother had said, "We're not Jewish, and you're having a sweet 16 in a few years, so no." She lost it and had a meltdown because she couldn't have a party celebrating a ritual of a religion she wasn't a part of and wouldn't be partaking in, when she had done nothing but talk crap about me for being in that religion for the last few months. I still remember my mother picking me up that day, listening to her bray in the parking lot. One of my good friends got a brand new Audi R8 for his 16th birthday. It matched his dad's. He got all peeved and huffy because it wasn't the right V10 or something like that. Still good friends with him though. We go to LA some weekends. His treat, of course. I didn't go to a massively pricey private school. Most of the kids there were from middle-class families who spent most of their money sending their kid to my school, because the other options were just so bad. But there were exceptions. We had 5 math sets and I was in the top 1. One day, one of the rich kids decides it would be funny to blow his nose in a 20-pound note and tosses it in a bin. A teacher sees this and flips out. He says if the kid ever does anything in that vein again, he'll move him to the bottom set. Now, about 3 weeks passed and the moron does it again. The teacher wasn't bluffing and kicks him down 4 classes. Being in set 5 compared to 1 was like walking into a room filled with Peter Griffins. After 1 class, the kid comes back blubbering to the teacher, just as we were all leaving to beg to get back into the class. It was like chicken soup for my middle-class soul. I was happy for weeks. This is just literally a complete disregard for money. Isn't it also illegal in some places to throw away or destroy currency? I knew a kid back in 4th grade. He was a little demon of a tyke, real jerk to everyone, and would lord himself over you in just about any conceivable way possible to get you to do his bidding. One day, some girl stood up to him and refused to do something. I forget what, it's been years. And he started yelling and screaming about how his big shot lawyer daddy was gonna sue her family for everything her family had. Come to find out, kid's been trying this with other kids and they all come to her defense. He turned bright red, like cherry red, and started screaming about how this whole school wanted to bring him down, and that he deserved everything that we all had. Really going to town on being an entitled brat. Ultimately, we found out that she'd forgotten to bring him his pencil he'd lent her after a class, and that's what started all the chaos. She forgot a pencil. Apparently, that was one expensive or one special pencil, cause he never shut up about it the rest of the semester, and would constantly harass and bully this poor girl over it. Kid wound up getting pulled out of school cause the bullying was so bad, and this little brat went around for the next year saying that he had her removed from the school, and his daddy was the one who had her parents remove her, saying she was worthless. He was expelled 2 years later from the same school. I wasn't there anymore, but apparently he'd brought a gun to school to try and show off how tough he really was. This one kid on his 16th birthday received a beautiful new Rolex. It was gold with a blue ring. Stunning watch. Apparently, this wasn't the color he was looking for, so he threw it over the school fence into the adjacent river. What followed can only be described as throwing a foot-long steak sub into a nest of hungry African kids. About 12 younger kids scrambled to retrieve this watch. From what I remember, his parents bought him a new watch. The right color this time, of course. Don't the parents of these children realize they're not doing them any kind of favors here? You're raising your kid to be a horrible person. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.